Okay, so you might have been surprised that the messages were loading when we're not actually clicking on our messages tab. But our messages is a child component of our member detail page. And when our member detailed page is constructed, it also constructs the child inputs as well. And because in our child input, in the ng on init, we've got a call to load messages, that's what's going on in our member detail component. So we want to control that. We don't want to load the messages until we know for sure that someone's clicked on this particular tab. So let's go take a look at what we need to do to resolve this. So let's clean these up for the time being. And what we want to take a look at is our member detail component HTML and also the component itself as well. So this is the tab we're interested in. And we need to know if this has been clicked on. And we're using this tab set component inside our member detail component. And if we take a look at the member detail component itself, then what do we have available to use inside here? Well, not very much just now. And something that we used earlier on, if we wanted to get hold of an element inside our component code from the template, then we use template reference variables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a template reference variable to the tab set itself, and I'm going to call it member tabs. And then what we can do, we can go to our member detail component, and in our properties here, because it's got a decorator, I'm just going to put it at the top, and we can use view child to go and get that member tabs, and we give it, or we use the selector, and we call it member tabs, so that's what we call it here. We can call this anything we like, but I'm going to call it member tabs. And specifically, we're going to get a tab set component here. And this is provided by NGX Bootstrap. So we're going to give it a type of tab set component. And what we're also going to add is another property inside here called active tab. And this is going to be a tab directive. So each one of our tabs inside here, we've got a tab directive specifically for these as well. And what we need to do here is create a method inside our component, and we'll just scroll down to the bottom here, and we'll create a method called onTabActivated. And we're going to receive the data, and the data is a type of tab directive. And what we want to do is say that list.activeTab equals data. And then we have access to the information inside that tab. And what we can do is say if list.activeTab.heading is equal to messages, so we're going to access the heading property inside the tab for our messages. This is the heading, and that's what we're going to compare to. And then what we'll do is say this.loadMessages, but we're going to bring the functionality for the loading of messages into the detail component so that we know if that tab's been clicked. And because we know that the messages are going to be loaded from this component anyway, because the members is a child component, what we'll do is we'll do that functionality inside here. So what we'll do is we'll open up our member messages component itself, and I'm going to cut this method, the load messages, and we're going to stick that inside our member detail component, which means we need the message service, so we'll have to bring that in as well. And then what we'll also do is create a property inside here for the messages. And these are going to be a type of message array. And what we'll do is we'll initialize this array to an empty array. And I can't remember if we did this on the other one, but we need to if we haven't, because in fact, I'm just going to check. Now it's fresh in my memory. We'll check the messages component, and yeah, we didn't do that. But we're using a length property in here, just as we will do in here, to see if we've actually got any messages. And if we don't do that, if we don't initialize the array, then for sure we're going to get an error if we try and access a length property on something. So what we need to do in here is add our message service. So we'll say private message service, and we'll bring in the message service that we created, and I'll bring this down. And let's take a look and see how we're doing. So we've got our load messages, and we have access to our member inside this component. So we've got our member, and what we can do is get our username from the member.username. And then what we'll also do we'll add another conditional inside here, and we'll say double ampersand, and we'll check to see if this .messages.length is equal to 0. Because if they're switching between the tabs of a user, and we already have messages loaded inside this component, then obviously we're not going to dispose of them and then reload them again. We'll just use the same ones. And then what we'll do is say list.load messages inside here. And let's just go back to the member messages component and clean up anything that we're not using in there anymore. So we're not using any of this. And what we're going to use, instead of the username here, we're just going to pass down the messages as an input property. So what we'll do is we'll change this to an input property of the messages, and then we can pass lem down to our member messages component. And what we also need to do is switch back to our member detail component, and then instead of passing down the username, we'll be passing down the messages, and we'll say messages equals, and we've just called it messages inside our member detail component. Now for each of these tabs, because we've created a method inside our member detail component called onTabActivated, what we need to do is inside our member detail component for each one of these tabs, we need to say, or give it a click event called selectTab, and what we're going to do is say onTabActivated, and we're going to pass down the event from this particular method. So our select tab will pass through the event, and inside that event is the tab directive that we have access to. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're just going to add this to each of the tabs. So on the photos as well, and also on the messages. Now if we've got everything hooked up correctly, what we should find when we go back to the browser, and let's just refresh this page, and now if we click on messages, now we load the messages and we see them inside here. And if we click through the different tabs, it's no problem because we've still got our messages inside here. Nice. What we want to take a look at next is how do we get directed from this button to the messages, and also from the matches, how do we get access to that particular tab from this button? And we'll take a look at that next.